but he also just wanted to be one of the guys. He just wanted to be a baseball player. He just wanted to come to the park, be great at his job, and go home after the game.
Welcome into Northside Territory, the Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma with my co-host Patrick Mooney. We're your Cubs beat writers at The Athletic. Patrick, we have a special guest this week due to the Ryne Sandberg statue ceremony. Ryne Sandberg, one of the greatest Cubs of all time, finally gets his day to honor him out in the Gallagher Way.
Yeah, and there's no better person to talk about kind of Ryne Sandberg's legacy at Wrigley Field, his impact on the Cubs franchise, like what really drove this guy. And it's Barry Rozner. He spent about 40 years at the Daily Herald. He was a Cubs beat writer, a longtime columnist. So he covered all sports in Chicago and like was really plugged in to every franchise. And he also did a ton of work on TV, on 670 The Score. Just like a guy who had great just common sense and a way to explain what was going on. He surprisingly didn't curse during our conversation with him, but I think we both came away from it thinking like, man, I could listen to Barry tell stories for like the next seven hours. We kept it tighter than that, but I think you'll come away with a really good understanding of like, who is this guy kind of underneath the statue and like why the Cubs are doing this weekend.
All right, Patrick, let's get to our guest. Barry Rozner covered the Cubs for the Daily Herald for a very long time. Let's put it that way. Barry, 37 years at the Daily Herald, first sidebar on the Cubs in 1985. I won't embarrass Barry and tell you how old I was at that time, Barry, but I was alive. So, hey, I'm not one of those young, annoying reporters, you know? So, and I did get the Daily Herald at my house. We did not get the Tribune or the Sun-Times. I grew up reading the Daily Herald. My teenage years, I read a lot of Barry Rozner, beat writer from 1990 for a decade, and then a columnist. Barry, we got Ryne Sandberg not retirement ceremony, statue coming up on Sunday. The statue is better than any retirement ceremony of the number, in my opinion. You get a statue that you're among the elite. I'm going to tell a quick little story. 1990 for me was the year that I went from Mets fan to Cubs fan. Long story why I was a Mets fan. I won't get too much into it. Obviously, I'm not a Cubs fan anymore as a beat writer, but it was because of Ryne Sandberg. That season, wow. I was collecting baseball cards with my dad. Ryne Sandberg's rookie card was on fire that year because he just kept hitting home runs every day. I remember my dad shushing me when we were trying to buy Ryne Sandberg rookie cards, and someone said, He's got 20 something homers. I was like, no, he has 24. He just hit 2 last night. My dad's like, shut up. What are you doing? We're trying to buy cards here. And you also, before we get to Sandberg, I want to start with this. You covered in a different era of covering baseball. And you also were around when it all transitioned and changed and was very like, I can't imagine what it was like covering baseball back then. Can you kind of tell us what you saw change from 80s, 90s to present day?
Well, you guys can speak to today certainly better than I can. I saw it, in bits and pieces the last few years when I was still working. Obviously did not like what I saw, but I can tell you this. When I started covering baseball, first of all, when you walked in that room, it was an adversarial relationship. You were not part of the team. You were there to do a job. And I mean, and there were legendary baseball beat guys that you would run into in every single press box you went into, and you felt a responsibility to do the job and to do it well and to cover the team hard and to be fair, but to not be part of the team. You certainly were not part of the group. You were there to uncover as much as you could, and you had the opportunity to do that. And this is what I think is so vastly different. You guys will be shocked to hear things like, I used to go sit in Don Zimmer's office for hours before a game. The clubhouse was open, I think, 3.5 or 4 hours before a game. And when you walked in that room, everybody was in there. Okay. Everyone was in front of their lockers. Imagine that. And that was a tiny, And that was a tiny clubhouse. That wasn't the palace that the Cubs have now. There weren't 10 or 11 different rooms they could go hide in. There was nothing. There was essentially no kitchen. I mean, Yosh had a room where you could make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That was the kitchen. There was a trainer's room, if you want to call it a trainer's room. Your bedroom at home is probably bigger than that. So there was no place for them to hide. And when you walked in, there was at least 25 guys. There was a room full of coaches. There was a manager in his room. You could walk into his room anytime you wanted. But when you walked in the clubhouse, there were Hall of Famers all over the place. And there were conversations to be had all over the place. And there were professionals everywhere you looked. And after a game, when you walked in, there were all those same guys. They were all there again. And especially if something bad happened, if it was a bad day, or if a player had done something bad, he was standing in front of his locker waiting for you. And there were truly some honorable guys. There were guys like Sandberg and Dawson and Maddox who, when they did something well, didn't really think there was anything to talk about. And sometimes on those days they were a little harder to find. But if they were the player that gave up the big hit or made an error or struck out with the bases loaded, they were always there waiting for you because they knew that was their responsibility. Plus, they're trying to teach the kids in the room what their responsibility is. And so I just use Sandberg as an example. I remember one time he made an error, which happened, a couple times a year, right? And it broke some 180 game errorless streak or some ridiculous thing. He was always on some sort of 100-game errorless streak. You lose track. It's hard for me to remember now, but I remember he had made an error, and we came in afterward, and one of the beat guys said, "Oh, we didn't think it was an error. We were fighting for you." And I was like, "What's this we stuff?" I'm not. I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm not the official scorer. Official scorer's got his job. He might suck at it. He usually did suck at it, depending on. I'm thinking specifically of Los Angeles and Houston. Those guys were terrible. Sometimes they were bad, but the fact is it's their job. They make the call. If the team wants to fight for them, fine. But we walk in and another guy says, "Yeah, we fought for you on that one," and I shook my head. And Sandberg goes, "It was an error. That's all."
Yeah.
Yep.
That was it. That was the whole conversation. And it probably wasn't, but that's not the point. The point is just eat it. Take responsibility, eat it, and move on. I can't even imagine that happening in today's game. And that's not. I'm not trying to sound like everything was better then. I know everybody hates that, and that's not my intention here. It's just I think we live in a different world where accepting responsibility is more difficult to come by. But being a beat guy was both incredible and terrible, as you guys know, as beat guys. I think it's I think it's the worst job at a newspaper. I really do. I think it's the hardest job at a newspaper. It's also the most rewarding because it's so hard. Like anything else that's hard, there's great reward in it. You guys, might not feel that today because you don't have the kind of access that we did. You don't have the kind of opportunity to fill up, 60 or 80 or 100 inches of copy every single day because there was so much opportunity to just write until your fingers were bleeding. I mean, there were days where I had days where it was a 6 or 7 or 8 day story. And, days like when Don Zimmer was fired at Shea Stadium, that's one that sticks out in my mind. But there were days like that, and you could dig and you could break stories and you could really do a job. And while the 8-month grind, which then turned into 10 and 11 and 12 as it is now, was brutal, physically demanding, mentally difficult, and from a relationship standpoint, impossible. Nevertheless, it was I think the maybe it wasn't the very top of the profession in terms of beat writing at that moment. Maybe that had come a few years before that. Maybe it was more like, I think if you were to look back at the greatest who ever did it, you'd probably look back to maybe the mid to late 80s. So I didn't miss it by much, but it certainly was a great job. And also at the same time, the most miserable work you could possibly be doing. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, because Patrick just said before we started recording that he's got to get on the plane and fly to San Francisco, and I would rather be stabbed in the eye with a knife than even ponder that possibility right now.
Well, that was part of our deal of coming on. There'd be absolutely no talk about the current state of the Cubs, which, speaking for Sahadev, we're very much good with that, because we can say the same thing over and over. So I wanted a little history lesson, because I had seen, I forget if it was just one group shot or just 3 different photos on Twitter, which has melted my brain, obviously, but it was kind of like Michael Jordan, Walter Payton, and Ryne Sandberg. And obviously, Michael Jordan's a global icon. Walter Payton left us too soon. But can you explain what it was like to be in Sandberg's orbit at that time? And who was the guy that you got to know, because the access back then was completely different than it is now?
Well, I mean, that list is really long. I mean, when I can remember doing Bulls sidebars in the 80s, and you had access to Michael Jordan. I mean, think about that. I mean, you could just walk up to Michael Jordan in a locker room and talk to him. I mean, it's a very long time ago, very different world. But in terms of Sandberg's orbit, his life changed dramatically in 1984. You guys all know the story. Everyone who's interested in hearing me talk about it knows the story, so I won't go into it. But those 2 home runs off of Bruce Sutter dramatically changed his life. And from that day forward, he went from, he was having that magical season in 84, an MVP season, but that day changed his life. That day, because it happened to be on national TV, and because of who he hit those 2 home runs off of, and the situations in which he did it, to tie a game twice late, once late, once in extras, it changed his life. And every day moving forward, he had to come to the ballpark prepared to be a superstar. And this is a guy who had worked extremely hard. Baseball was not easy for Ryne Sandberg. Maybe it looked like it. And maybe there are guys for whom baseball is easy. I can't understand that, because the game is so hard. I can't understand it. I mean, maybe for Bryce Harper it's easy. I don't know. Maybe for Junior Griffey it was easy. I don't know. But I know for 99% of guys it's really, really hard. And I know for Sandberg it was extremely difficult. But he worked so hard to get to that point. And from that day forward, he had to work twice as hard. So it changed his life because of the responsibility he felt to come to the park every day, to be that guy for the people who were buying tickets. And that was an incredible burden for this shy kid from Spokane who, thought he was going to college to play football. He was an All-American quarterback in high school, signed to play football at Washington State. And here he is now in Chicago, pretty big market, even though it may not feel like it sometimes. It was a pretty big market, in an era of Walter Payton and Michael Jordan and Mike Ditka and Ryne Sandberg. It was a big place to be, and that responsibility was a huge burden for him. And so he worked extremely hard. And I think one of the things that you talk about being in his orbit, one of the things I think back on now is the guy that I know now is very different than the guy I knew then. And I think probably like a lot of guys, I know Frank Thomas said this once, I think he probably wishes he had more fun playing baseball. And maybe that's not on you. Maybe we all think that, maybe we all look back. Maybe I should, look back on my time being around, Maddox and Dawson and Sandberg and Sutcliffe and Ossenmacher and Bilecki and Grace and Dunson and all, these amazing professionals, and and think about those times more fondly, but you're just grinding so hard,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think Sandberg was grinding so hard that I don't know that, generally speaking, he was having fun in the moment. Like, to most guys, winning is fun. That's 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 why you play, right? It's the
Mhm.
winning. That's
Yeah.
I played hockey for 40 years. I remember losses more than I remember wins. That's what sticks with you. I think probably he would have had more fun if the Cubs had won more. There just wasn't a lot of winning during those years. But he he never, like, I don't think he allowed himself to realize how big a star he was. He was huge in this town. He was a monster in this town. But there were some things he did specifically to try to make his life more livable. One was he was out in public. He did not, if Walter walked down Michigan Avenue, certainly if Michael walked down Michigan Avenue at the height of their powers, it would have been a mob scene.
Yeah.
Sandberg was always walking down Michigan Avenue. And I'm not comparing his stardom to theirs, okay?
Yeah.
But his stardom was pretty big in this town. And he was always walking down Michigan Avenue or down by the bike path on Oak Street Beach or down Division or Rush. And so he made himself available. And I think that made his life more livable by not making it such a big deal that he was out somewhere. The other thing was he didn't take any endorsements, something for which he was heavily criticized, which, I mean,
Really?
Wow.
he was very heavily. Sahadev, I don't know if you remember this, for maybe you were just getting into your wheelhouse then, but he was heavily criticized for not doing endorsements. But not only was he not good at it, it wasn't his personality, but he just didn't want to. He didn't want to take the time. Whatever spare time he had, he wanted to be with his family, because it's just, you guys know, it's just not very much during a baseball season, and he didn't want to spend an off day filming a commercial. Yet he was trashed for it. Why isn't he bigger in this town? Why isn't he a celebrity? Why isn't he doing endorsements? And I would, whenever I would get that question, my answer would be, what do you care? What is it?
Yeah.
What is it like? What is it to you that he doesn't do endorsements? I mean, the man just wants to live his life. So he did some things that to try to make his life more livable, and maybe make, it sounds crazy. He didn't want to be the things that people wanted him to be. He didn't want to be a superstar. He didn't want to be universally known everywhere he went. He wanted to be great. There's no doubt about that. He wanted to be great. And if in the middle of May you're still doing the same thing you were doing in spring training, which is take 90 ground balls every single morning before anybody else is on the field, 30 left, 30 right, 30 right at you. I mean, obviously you want to be great. He wanted to be great, but he also just wanted to be one of the guys. He just wanted to be a baseball player. He just wanted to come to the park, be great at his job, and go home after the game. And that was unusual. That's just not the way most superstars behave. But for my money, one of the most honorable people I've ever been around, one of the most genuine people I've ever been around, one of the most dignified people I've ever been around, and one of the most respectful people I've ever been around. It's how he behaved before he got to the park, how he behaved once he got to the park, and how he behaved after he left the park. He just believed very much in respecting the people who came before him. Certainly the people who sat on that Hall of Fame stage behind him when he gave his speech, respecting his teammates, his coaches, his managers, the fans, and and his opponents. And that just meant doing things the right way. And I find that to be very honorable, and I think it's something to be admired, honestly.
Barry, in my from my memory, that 90 season was just godlike. I always have to remind myself that he didn't win MVP that year. He was actually fourth. There was this guy named Barry Bonds that apparently had a good season. But I don't think he should have been fourth. That doesn't matter. But he was a number 2 hitter, a second baseman that hit 40 home runs. Maybe that's normalish now. Maybe that doesn't open eyes now. That was freakish back then. That didn't happen. Right. This was before Jeff Kent. The second baseman didn't have weren't power hitters. Power hitters didn't hit number 2 in lineups. That just wasn't how it was back then. Patrick and I covered like a monumental stretch of play when kind of Jake Arrieta went on that run. So I think we've covered something like that, I feel like. But did it feel like that? Did it stand out to you while you were covering it? I believe you said it was your first year on the beat. Did you realize, like, wow, what am I covering right here?
Well, if you look back, that, and you guys are much better at the numbers than I am. I don't know what his WAR was in 1984. It had to be an absolute monster number. But that year was huge in every statistical category. 85, he goes 26 homers, 54 stolen bases. I mean, there wasn't anything that he couldn't do on a baseball field. He was great at absolutely everything you could do on a baseball field. He wasn't a stat collector because he played in the moment. What needs to be done right now? Do I have to make a great play defensively? Do I have to hit and run? Do I have to steal a base? Do I have to go first to third? He was as good first to third as any baseball player who's ever played the game. And that wasn't because of, he was a very fast runner, but far from the fastest. He was just a brilliant baseball player. He wasn't as fast as Willie Mays, but I'll bet you he could go first to home almost as good as Mays because of how smart he was and how good he was at reading a play. So he did whatever had to be done in the moment. You need a 3-run homer? Okay, then I'm going to try and hit a 3-run homer. But mostly he was looking in gaps. Mostly he was looking to drive in runs, to score runs. He wasn't thinking home run. But then in 89, he had to carry that team because Dawson was – the whole team got hurt in 89. So Sandberg really carried that team. So I don't know if he got close to 30 homers that year. It might have had 25 or something like that. I don't know if you guys have the numbers in front of you. So, but then – sorry,
30 homers, 30 and 90 or 89. Sorry,
89.
30.
And in 84, he had an 8.5 WAR season.
Yeah, which is crazy. That's so good
for a second baseman.
Right,
for a second baseman, and there was no power in the middle infield in those days. Yeah. This was extremely rare. So you get to 90, and by 90, really. In the pre-steroid era, this is right around the time a guy like him should be reaching his power potential. It should be ages like 20, 28, 20. Back then, 28, 29 was about when you started to reach your power potential. So that felt pretty normal, 28 to 33. Look at Billy Williams. After age 35, that's what normally happens to a player after age 35. What Rafael Palmeiro did after age 35 is not normal. Okay. So you look at Sandberg's, those years and you go, okay, well, this is about when, but still he's a middle infielder. He hit his 30th homer in Houston. I remember being in the Astrodome, which is obviously a very hard place to hit his 30th homer. I want to say in late August, probably around August, maybe 30th or something like that. And I looked at one of the guys sitting next to me and I said, I wonder if he could hit 40. and then we get to those last 3 games in Philly, and I think he's sitting on 98 RBI and 39 homers. And these were the 3 games played that had been added on because of the strike. Or lockout or whatever it was. Right. That was it was 90. Who knows? I went through so many work stoppages. I think that one was a strike. But anyway, so we're Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Philly to end the season. Another nondescript Cubs season where they just didn't have enough pitching and it just wasn't very good. And Monday, it might have been first inning. I don't know. but Monday in Philadelphia with Doug DeCenzo on first base, he hits a 2-run homer for his 100th RBI and his 40th homer. And as he crosses home plate, gets in the dugout, and Zimmer says, "That's it. You're done for the year." So that was it. So so almost 3 full games to play. He's got his 40 home runs, and now he gets to just sit on the bench. That's probably when he enjoyed baseball the most, was getting to watch a couple of games and just relax. It was hard for him to really relax because he just felt so much pressure all the time. But I think that 90 season, or maybe if you go to Baseball Reference and you look at those averages from, say, take 89, 90, 91, and 92, those 4 years, you're going to find some pretty strong numbers for those 4 years.
Oh yeah.
93, he gets hit in the hand by Mike Jackson in spring training, and he really wasn't the same. He never really got his power back after that. He got hit in a very bad spot, broke his hand, came back probably too soon, never really got his, although after he retired and came back for the 96 season, he did hit 25 home runs, which was crazy after a year and a half off. That it just tells you what a phenomenal athlete he was and how good he was. But I understand you're watching that 90 season and being amazed by that. But I would say by then most of us were pretty used to it. It was just kind of, he was just a phenomenal baseball player. I wish I could give you like some good comp from today. I would say A-Rod, if he hadn't done steroids, might be a good comp. Obviously that's not a modern guy to look at, but Ryne Sandberg was a guy who could hit you a home run anytime, although he was not looking to. You guys, I'm sure, don't like batting average, but he was always looking to hit 300. He felt like if he hit 300 and scored 100 runs, he was probably going to do the things that year that were necessary to help his team win games. They were just sort of things in the back of his mind. But he could drive in 100 runs, could score 100 runs. He was great on the bases. He could have stole 50 bases any year he wanted to. Oddly, he never had a 30-30 season because it never occurred to him that it was something that he should be doing. Like what does that what does that matter, right? But he had many years. I mean, he had years of over 30, including 54 and 85 stolen bases, and he had the years of 30 or more home runs, but never put those together. Obviously, and arguably, when he retired, the best defensive second baseman of all time. A lot of people would now say Robbie Alomar, but when he retired, he had the most power at the position ever. He was the best defensive player at the position ever. And he did everything else you could ever want to do on a baseball field. I mean, he could hit for average. He had a great arm. He could steal bases. And probably something you guys either don't know or don't remember, his rookie year, he brought 5 gloves to spring training because no one told him what position he was going to play.
Wow.
And he played all 3 outfield positions and third, short, and second. And obviously Larry Bowa was going to be at short, but he didn't know. He kind of thought he was probably going to be the center fielder. And with 5 days to go in spring training, they put him at third base. And he wasn't good at third base. He was great at third base, having never played the position in his life. He was a shortstop his entire life. Now he's playing third base, completely different position. Probably should have won the Gold Glove. He didn't have that many errors. They gave it to Mike Schmidt because Mike Schmidt, hit 1,000 homers again that year and was, major star. But Sandberg could have won the Gold Glove at third base. With a week to go, or maybe a month to go in the 82 season, they move him to second base. Pardon me. They move him to second base, where he had never played before. And in his first year at second base, he wins the Gold Glove. And every Gold Glove after that, pretty much. So just an amazing baseball player. Just kind of, for an old school guy like me who grew up, really my wheelhouse was really the 70s and the early 80s, I graduated from college in 84. So, it's really those 10 years, probably from 74 to 84 that's really my wheel. And that was an era of tremendous pitching, great defense, great base running, and a certain style of game that I'm sure doesn't exist anymore, but was really romantic to those of us who came from that era. And Ryne Sandberg was a guy who would have fit in any generation, but certainly was also a product of watching baseball in the 60s and 70s, and had great admiration for the guys who played the game ultimately the way he played the game.
Barry, you kind of alluded to this, that Chicago is a big city that can feel like a small town. And I've had, kind of friends or contacts who've alluded to what you said about this stage of Sandberg's life, of like, he's kind of a grandpa up in the suburbs who's, the way it was explained to me was like, he has some stuff in his house that alludes to the fact that he's a baseball player, but he's very much just like, he's grandpa. Like, he's day to day, like a presence in their lives. And it looked like you kind of met up with him recently. Sounds like he's doing a lot better health wise, but can you explain that exhale he seems to have? It's just amazing to me that, like, you come from kind of the middle of nowhere, Washington, and show up in Chicago, and fast forward, you're at a stage of his life where you're, a grandpa up in the suburbs who's just kind of wants to be there for his family.
Yeah, it's there were some stages to go through, right?
Yeah,
there were some stages. Yeah. There's the exhale at retiring. Okay, you've worked every single day of your life for so long to try to be great at something, something most of us will never achieve, in any aspect of life, right? Any kind of endeavor. And there's that exhale from being done. But then there's the immediate, well, now what? Right? Now, what do you do? For someone highly competitive and who had been walking that razor's edge for so long, now what? And there wasn't really anything there for a bit except for the wait for the Hall of Fame. So that's kind of the next step. And so he gets in the Hall of Fame. That's the next hurdle. And then the big speech, which is just also a life-changing event for him. And then, you're still a relatively young person at that point. Then what? Well, then the Cubs are going through all these changes, and he starts thinking, maybe I could manage. And the Cubs don't really give him the time of day. They throw him, they throw him because of, others in the organization, probably not Jim Hendry. He gets a chance at Peoria. Mm-hmm. And most people thought, well, he's not going to ride the buses, right? This is a guy, a Hall of Famer. Mike Schmidt lasted 1 week at low Class A in Tampa, St. Pete. He lasted 1 week, and he said, screw this. I'm not doing this. But Sandberg rode the buses for 5 years and loved every minute of it, because it was like his journey in the minor leagues. Ryne Sandberg was not one of these bonus babies who was given a job in the minor leagues and told, you're going to go from Double-A to the majors in a year, which is obviously very common today, but was not back then. There were some guys, but he was a full, 4-year guy player in the minor leagues, right? Or maybe even 5. And then there was still no place for him in Philadelphia. So he understood the climb. That was a big part of his life, was the climb, was the having to fight every day. So he loved going through the stages in the minor leagues as a manager. So he does that. And then he accomplishes his goal. He gets to the big leagues as a manager in Philadelphia. It doesn't work out. It was, they gave a guy who develops young players a veteran team that didn't want him there. So that was not a very good situation. That was not destined to work out well. But he was glad that he did it. He was glad that he accomplished that. And then what he wanted when that was over was just to be back as part of the Cubs family. And he was able to do that and sort of met, there were some fences that need to be mended, not from his end, but those fences were mended, and he became part of the Cubs family in time to, to be part of a World Series celebration. And I think, that was a point where he became very, very satisfied with his life. And to just be a dad and a husband and a grandfather. And you're right about the big baseball room. Like, I'm sure you've seen pictures in guys' houses with the jerseys that circle the room, and all the bats and balls and gloves and everything else. He had a pretty decent sized room in back in the early 90s in Ahwatukee in Arizona. I remember that, and there was a lot of hardware around that room, right? All of it earned, all of it deserved. It's not very big anymore. It's not very big anymore. There's not a lot. I think we all get to that point where you start throwing everything out. Like, what is it? What does it matter, right? If you can't give it like I had boxes of stuff from when I was a kid. I had a ball autographed by the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates, right? We Are Family, World Series champs. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares. It's like, all right, what am I going to do with that? I don't have Ryne Sandberg's Hall of Fame resume and giant boxes full of all those awards and stuff, but there's just a point where it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's just stuff. So what are you going to do with it? I think he would be thrilled if every one of his grandkids, and he has a lot, would want to take something, an MVP award, a plaque, a bat from his 40th home run. If everybody wanted something, that would be great. And I think they will. I think that's how that'll probably work out.
Barry, I could listen to these stories forever, to be honest. And I wish I would have taken more advantage of having people like you in the press box, because I grew up on the 90s Cubs, which without 98, I would argue is one of the worst decades of baseball. But I'm fascinated by it, and I it's what made me fall in love with the game. So I appreciate it. So I'd love to hear more stories. We've taken up too much of your time, but this was.
What is
Barry. Thank you.
What is it you think I have to do? I mean, I'm not playing golf until 1:00. So
good point.
All I have to do is stretch. So I have 2 more hours for you.
Thanks so much for your time, Barry. Those stories are epic, and I feel like you just are a wealth of knowledge about this organization and an era that goes underappreciated. But obviously, 10 straight All-Star games, I believe, is what Ryne Sandberg has. We don't cover, like, we covered a World Series. We don't cover a player like that. We just haven't. Like that. I think that goes overlooked sometimes. Just the longevity, the ability to consistently go in there year after year and produce and stick with one team for the majority of the time. We don't see that anymore, and I'm not sure if we'll see it ever, but not very often. Those players are very rare now, especially with the way front offices work, because you got to get rid of that guy before his value goes down. You got to get value for him before.
How about a guy who took basically a 50% haircut on every contract he ever signed, because he didn't want to. Not only did he not want to go anywhere, he didn't even want to negotiate. He's just like, basically, I'll sign a contract and stay. I just don't want to go through this. I mean, you picked the right guy. You picked a great year in 1990, but you also picked the right guy. This is an extremely honorable, decent human being who, if you wanted your kids to grow up to be like, and you were all sitting around a TV watching a game together, and you wanted to watch him on the field do things, at least in my world, the right way and behave the right way in an honorable and respectful way, man, you picked the right guy. So anyway, happy to come back anytime, boys. And I'm going to be there at the ceremony Sunday. So I will find my way up to the press box if they will let me, and I will come say hello.
Thanks so much for the time.
Awesome.
Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
All right. Take care, boys.
Take care, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to Northside Territory. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, do all those good things you do for podcasts. Make sure to read my work and Patrick's work over at The Athletic. We got you covered on the Cubs beat. Cubs are on a 2-game winning streak, which feels like a lot for this team. Won their first series in over a month. We'll see if they can continue that against the red-hot Mets, the grimace-fueled Mets. It's going to be a big weekend out at Wrigley. Obviously, the Sandberg statue is how it'll wrap up on Sunday. But 3 games against the Red Hot Mets, we'll have you covered there. Monday, we'll come back at you with a podcast, and hopefully you will keep listening. Thanks, and take care.